Hi everybody, it's Mick Levinskas here from She's Building a Robot, and I am with Dianne McGrath. Dianne's joining me from space, no, from Melbourne, but definitely wonderfully has her head in the clouds about some of her ambitions, and she's agreed to come and tell a bit of her story about her journey into the world of STEM. And to share that journey with you. So, what a wonderful, diverse background. So, Dianne, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, no worries, Mick. It's fantastic to be a part of it. Thanks for inviting me.
No problems. I'd love to start. What was your first memory ever of an experience with sort of technology, science, engineering, or maths? Like, was there a school lesson, a class, a camp, or and what was the spark that sort of got you into that?
I think the first strong memory of being involved with something sciencey, mathsy when I was a kid was when I was living in the outback in the Northern Territory. I was probably about 11, I think at the time, 10 or 11. And my family had just moved from Adelaide, in the Adelaide Hills, from a town called Hahndorf, and we moved to the outback, literally to the desert in the Northern Territory, quite some hours out from Alice Springs, and we lived on an Aboriginal community there. And my brothers and I were doing our schooling by correspondence, and in those days, that was before School of the Air was very big. And so what this correspondence school would do, they'd mail us our schoolwork. It's a little bit different to the isolation remote learning of the kids of today.
Sure.
Our isolation remote learning was a big package for our science. So they would send us these massive, like really big boxes that were full of fun-looking stuff. We had no idea what it was. It was test tubes and beakers and all sorts of random things, and we had to follow instructions to do particular science experiments and then write them up and send back our answers by mail and the kits as well to our teachers back in Adelaide. And so there was a lot of fun with that, because you'd get the parcel and you never knew what was going to be in it, and you'd open it up and there'd be all this stuff in it, like you didn't know what it was going to be doing. And so there was this curiosity about, well, what will we do? Will we blow something up? Or just, I think all kids want to know, are they going to blow something up? So
Exactly.
Will I blow something up? Will I do something to the house? What will happen? And then our mother would usually help supervise us to make sure that we didn't blow something up. But it still was so fun following and a lot of self-guiding really about what does this do? What will come out of this? I'm not watching anybody else do it in the science lab at school. I'm discovering completely by myself. So yeah, a lot of self-guided learning there. It's lots of fun.
Wow, it's really interesting, and I'd love to. There's a whole other hour of discussion around the impact of self-discovery versus almost forced discovery. Of it's like Tuesday at 11 you're doing science, and okay, today we're doing experiment, and you're one of 30 kids, and you sit there, and even if you're doing an experiment, the motivation is quite different, right? And every day I'm doing science, and it's like, oh, that's just science. But if once a month I'm getting this box in the mail with anything,
who knows what's in it? Exactly.
Yeah,
it was so
your
fun.
Your self-motivation. So go again. Keep going.
No, that's all right. If your point about the self-guided learning was an interesting one too, versus this is every Wednesday at science class or something, because there was the only sort of timelines we had were when we had to send assignments back by. And so we could spend as long as we liked doing the experiments or very quickly, or we could repeat them as many times as we had resources. So we had a lot more opportunity to spend the time that we wanted to doing the work. And I loved that, absolutely loved it. My brother and I'm a twin. So my twin brother and we couldn't wait till we sat down and did this work together. It was, I think, the favorite part of my study when I was remotely learning.
Do you think it had a long-term influence on you, that the different perspective on experimenting, that you had time, but there was still a deadline, and you had, did you experiment outside the box, or did you always follow the rules? Did you try new things? And I'd love to know. There's a big, I think there's a big resurgence in experimentation culture in companies, especially big tech companies, and I think there's a risk to it, but there's so much to gain. And I'd love to know the impact that might have had on your career, in your mindset. Was that tough to work to have a career like that because you were wanting to experiment but couldn't, or did you find opportunities to experiment?
Well, as a student back then, I definitely experiment. Don't tell my mother, but I definitely experimented with some of the stuff that perhaps I shouldn't have been doing at the time because it wasn't the exact experiment. But I was curious. I thought, what happens if I do that? So, and I was always that child, like, what? I wonder what happens if I do that thing. In fact, when I was around, how old would I have been? 6, I think 6. When my parents still lived in the Adelaide Hills, maybe I was 7, I went one time with my mother to a factory in the Barossa Valley where she would pick up large supplies of some of the pickles and preserves that she would sell through the store that they owned in the hills. And I went, the factory was so fascinating. There was all of these belts and rollers and people wearing caps and coats and buttons and all. What is this place? How fabulous. And then there's this big red button next to one of the big machines. And I thought, I wonder what happens when you press that button. And yes,
it was begging to be pressed.
The button was pressed and I didn't sit down for a week, I don't think. My mother just went whack. I stopped the entire factory. Everything went to standstill. The sirens blared. So I've always been that curious child. I wonder what happens if. So yes, that self-experimentation. I've carried it with me through my career as well, and whether that's been in the pharmaceutical industry or when I worked in government, but particularly these days, what I do in my career, I try and find new and novel ideas. Sometimes something hasn't been done before, or you don't know if it's possible to be done, and so that's where that curiosity, think, wonder how that works and can we make it work? So I've always taken that approach, let's say, for example, my biohacking, or even what I'd like to be doing, going to Mars, for example. If I could have the chance to be involved with a mission to Mars to set up a sustainable community on another planet, how would we do that? It hasn't been done here on Earth. What would we need to do? What are the challenges? How will we overcome that? Can we test a few things here? So that sort of stuff fascinates me, and it's why I've gone down that pathway, including in my PhD. I'm trying to come up with a new concept or a new idea about how we can understand what happens when we waste food to try and reduce that. So why does it happen? Not just because I don't want that or it's not enough. There's something else happening there. And what can we do so I've actually tested a particular intervention, bit of a science project. I've tested whether something works to reduce waste. So I had to develop a science experiment, had to work out what that protocol would be, had to measure things, and I've been doing statistics to analyse whether it's been effective or not. So it's definitely been part of my curiosity to try and find solutions to things.
Well, and one of my motivations to write this book was because I heard from a number of women in STEM careers that they actually faced pressure through their teen years because that kind of curiosity and desire to experiment just doesn't really ordinarily fall into many traditional careers, even for, I know it's 2020, but I'm talking about there's a lot of male careers which I'll at least have some opportunity for that. Whereas a lot of the women I spoke about in STEM, they said that, it was women don't do that kind of thing. Women don't do that kind of thing. Did you hit up against barriers, and how did you push through them? Like, how did you find a way to make something you love doing a part of your career?
Well, actually, before my career, even when I was in my final year at high school in year 12, I studied chemistry, physics, and maths A and B, or pure and applied, or 1 and 2. I don't know what they might call it in the different states around Australia these days. But so I was always fascinated by, obviously, our maths and science subjects. And I wanted to study, I'd studied science, physics in year 11, but I wanted to do it in my final year as well. And at my school at the time, I was going to a girls' school when I finally went down, finished doing correspondence, and my parents sent me to a real school to sit with real people
Yep.
and have a real teacher. So for year 12. And so there was no one else except for about 2 other girls that wanted to do physics. So there's only 3 of us in the entire school that wanted to do physics in year 12. And the school was, well, I'm sorry, there's not enough interest in it. We're not going to have that subject available.
Wow.
And so we all of us girls were, what? and the school found a solution. The school, it bound, sort of made a relationship with another school, another girls' school, where they had similarly only a few girls that wanted to study physics in year 12. So we had a combined class where 3 from our school and 3 from another school would get together. So 6 of us was enough to justify having one teacher cover us, which is great because physics is so fun. It's maths with experiments. That's really what it was. We got to, it's all about motion and dropping things and moving things. And so you got to play with a lot of stuff and then do the math to show why it worked or why that might be a problem. So it was so good to be able to do that. But it did mean having to step forward and go, hey, hang on a sec, we want to do this stuff. Don't hold us back.
Yeah.
So barriers exist.
Wow. Okay. And so did a lot of science, a lot of maths, and love that. And I'm looking forward to reading your memoirs, which I no doubt will come out at some point in the future. But
one day,
when you get back from Mars or sent from Mars, whichever one.
There.
Exactly. But can you give us a quick journey? So from year 12, lots of science and maths to today. Like what are the big steps you took, and what are some of the ones that maybe were challenging steps or really scary at the time but worthwhile doing?
So my first degree at university after I finished year 12 was secondary teaching. So I became a qualified secondary mathematics and English teacher. English because I love English. It's sort of rounds things out. It allows me to think differently. I like having different ways of thinking. So there's the scientific way of thinking, but then there's a more expansive, fluid element of thinking that I like from the humanities as well. So I studied that, and I didn't end up doing much teaching though, just the initial qualification amount of time to make sure that I got my qualification. But then there wasn't work at that time for teachers, and by the time when I graduated. So I moved, I just got a job working in a sports store, managing a sports store. A little bit different from being a maths teacher, and not a lot of science involved there, but a lot of math because of course you actually had to balance books, and so accounting sort of principles there. And while there, I met somebody who worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and I learned about what they did. And my grandfather had been a pharmacist, and I'd grown up as a very young child up to the age of 6, spending a lot of time in his pharmacy. And I used to love watching him do his work. He was a compound pharmacist, which meant he would make some of the actual medications himself. So putting together some of the compounds to create the medicine for some of the patients. Yeah, friend customers, fantastic. So it was like being in potions class during Harry Potter. So you'd see all this stuff going on, and it'd be like, wow, that's amazing. So I was always quite fascinated with the pharmaceutical world as well. So when I met someone that worked in that industry, I thought, you can get a job where you can do this sort of stuff all the time. That is fantastic. Yeah. So I worked for the pharmaceutical company GSK for what turned out to be 12 years, starting off just in sales and learning about a number of different medical areas. So once again, here's science, understanding medicine and chemistry, biology. And I worked through the company a number of different roles that, including in the medical team, sales, marketing, all sorts. And eventually I actually ended up being a global manager for a portfolio of vaccines that are used around the world in the immunisation programs that every single child in Australia receives. Every baby in Australia gets a jab with a vaccine that I was in charge of, which is pretty wild to think about. Yeah, so that was really cool. And that's just because I was interested in immunology as well, and how can we improve public health. And so I really was fascinated by that. So I did that for quite a few years. Then I moved, took a year off and moved back to Australia because I was working in Europe at the time. And when I moved back to Australia, I went and did some more study. I did a postgraduate degree in environmental management. And then I went and worked for the government, the Australian government, because I was fascinated to think, well, how can we become more sustainable with our energy systems? We're really facing a challenge here with climate change. So I wanted to work with the government to work in the energy sector. And I worked in the government's Department of Resources, Energy and Tourism, specifically looking at our energy future. So that was something I got to do while there, and help drive and create a new law, actually, which was something I never thought I'd get to do, create law, but that was pretty cool. Just because I was followed a pathway that interested me. You never know what you get to do. And that's what I'm wanting to encourage some of the girls that watch this or hear this or read anything. If you follow the pathway that interests you, you end up doing some amazing things sometimes. You never know what it's going to be, but if you get the education, if you follow with the passion, sometimes the opportunity presents itself that you would never expect.
Yep. Just to be clear, you sound like a confident, bold person, but did you feel fear at the time, but then had the courage to go forward?
Yes, definitely. Like one example of that is when I applied to be a part of the Mars One project, Mick. So as you know, I'm a Mars One astronaut candidate. I'm one of 100 people worldwide who are shortlisted at the moment in the selection process.
Amazing.
And when I first heard about the Mars One mission, and I saw that the potential would be to be part of a crew or a community on Mars, to live permanently there and set up a new society for us. Everything. Imagine if we could start our world from scratch. What would we do? What would we keep? What would we change? I thought, how brilliant would that be? And so when I applied, and you had to make your application public, so I could see who else was applying. And there were people that worked for NASA. There were people who were astrophysicists. There were just incredibly smart people, really smart, and had the sort of qualifications in the space area that I really didn't have. Like, who would be interested in me? You know, I'd studied a number of different interesting things, and I'd worked in a few interesting areas, but I wasn't an astronaut. I wasn't a physicist. So I hadn't done all of those sorts of things that they might want. And I was a bit tentative about whether I'd apply, actually. I thought, you know, I can choose not to apply. In fact, I can pull out my application at any stage. But I've left it in. And why? Because I thought, I'm not going to be the one that's going to hold myself back from this. I want someone else to make that decision whether I'm suitable at that time for that role. Correct. So I ended up pressing submit. But I can remember pressing the button on my laptop. I went submit the application, and then I went, big deep breath, and then walked away. It's like,
exactly.
Oh my God. Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen?
That's a big send. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a big send.
Well done for the courage. Where is it at now? Like, is it still? Obviously, there's a lot of technology to develop. Like, is there a timeline for it? And how does your life fit into that timeline? Do you need to stay active and learning and participating, or are you waiting mostly?
Definitely. Well, we can choose to wait, of course, until Mars One continue with the selection process. With the current COVID situation that we have here in Australia and around the world, there's a lot of go slows on a lot of different projects. We know even this month, at the moment, it's July 2020, and there are 3 Mars missions this month, one from the United Arab Emirates, one from China, and one from NASA. There was supposed to be one from Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and the Europeans, but that's been slowed down at the moment because of, as you can imagine, it's a bit hard to really focus on stuff. So Mars One's on the go slow at the moment, but I'm not. I've decided, well, just because my goal to do that today has been put a little bit on the shelf, doesn't mean I can't be as ready as I can be for when it comes forth again. So I continue to research and learn, follow what's happening, upskill myself as well. And what I do in particularly is work on my physical health and some of the biohacking that I do around that. Because, for example, if the Mars One mission, its schedule at the moment is to send the first human crew in 2031 after having sent about half a dozen or so technical missions first. So all the infrastructure to go in advance, followed by a human crew later once everything's been robotically deployed. 2031. Now I'm 50, actually I'm 51 in a few days' time. So I'm going to be in my mid 60s by the time a mission gets to go.
Yep.
Yeah. Is that old? Maybe not. The oldest person who's been to space has been 77.
Wow.
Which is, so it's like, okay, so maybe age doesn't matter. Maybe it's health.
Yeah.
And it does. That's the key thing. The head of selection has said, we're more interested in your health status than your age. So what I've been doing is been looking at aspects of my health. It's like, well, I wonder if I can reverse some of that. For example, I used to wear glasses, and I haven't had to wear glasses for the last 4 years because what did I do? I found out that astronauts, about 64% of women and 82% of men, have issues with their vision when they come back from space. I thought, right, okay, if that's a problem coming back from space or being in space, what would happen to me if I already have to wear glasses? Would it get worse? So I thought, well, I wonder why the eyes do that. So I went into the research. Once again, that curious thing, how does it happen? Why does it happen? And then started researching what happens with the muscular structure in the eye. And then, well, maybe we can do some things that can alter our field of focus, so our focal length, in such a way that it expands our muscular ability and in the eyes. And so that's what I started working on, different musculature activity with the eye. And since then, I haven't had to wear glasses for nearly 4 years, which is phenomenal. Same thing with increasing bone mass. Yeah. So
no surgery, just by work on your muscles. Amazing. Well,
vocal work. Yeah. Well, most of the time we keep our... Well, one of the, when I thought about it, after I'd read about what happens and how the eye works, so just the basics of what happens to the eye, just generally as we age, if we think about what we do every day, we look at screens a lot, don't we? Or if we do look in the distance, it's really just to the end of the room. We don't really look very far. And so we're keeping our field of motion for our muscles, for our eyes, in a very narrow frame. So what would happen? It's a bit like doing a bicep curl for those who do exercise in the gym. A bicep curl that only goes this sort of range, like that far. Then you're never going to grow the muscle. So it's like, how can I grow my muscle? How can I allow my muscle of my eyes to get its full range of motion again? So that would just be exercises like you do with the bicep.
Amazing. Well, I've just added to my gym routine. Yeah, thank you. Well, it's so much. I think there's still so much to learn. I think it's one of the things about, again, going to Mars that I love is the pure discovery and opportunities. There's going to be 1,000 things you can't plan to learn them. You can only learn by doing. But is there one thing that's like that would be amazing? Is it just being in Mars, or is there something particular about being on Mars that really, really drives you?
Oh, there's so many things. Everything from just the fun of weightlessness on the way there, and even getting on Mars when you've got a third of Earth's gravity, to then, for me, one of the fascinating things is, wow, okay, imagine we are living in a completely closed loop system for all of our resources, for water, for energy, for food, everything. How would we do it? Like nutrients, for example. If we're going to live in a society where we have to grow all of our own food to survive and ensure that those plants have the right nutrients to grow to then feed us, how do we manage that nutrient cycle? And that's really been interesting to me. And I did almost like a pilot project for that last year. I got to go and so here we are, experimentation again. I went and spent 2 weeks with the Mars Desert Research Station in the Utah desert. So I went and did an isolation research project there, and they just run all these research projects ongoing. And so you can apply. Anyone can apply to do a research project there. Once you have to be, I think you need to be a university age and older. And so mine was, I wanted to go in and see what happens to our food waste. The food that we waste when we're eating as a crew, because we're a crew of 4, if that's going to be collected as compost for our food system, what's in the compost? What are we actually feeding our plants? If it's going to be, we might be eating freeze-dried food for many months until we can grow our first plants. So what's the waste from the freeze-dried food? Is it really salty? That would be a problem. So that's what my research did. I had a look at that to work out what's actually in the waste that's going to go into the compost. So that, highlights what some
Interesting.
problems are going to be. Yeah, it
So
was
many,
really
so many
fascinating.
systems. There's so many big problems to be solved. It's and I think
Yeah.
partly you just got to have the boldness to go to then have the courage and the momentum to try to solve those things,
Mm.
which is amazing. So I know you're busy testing all these things, so I don't want to keep you back from
No,
your
that's not
Mars
a problem at all,
efforts.
Mick.
Can you There's a lot of young women who are I think I very positively. I hope the world has changed, going in a better direction. We have a lot more work to do. If there are young girls out there who are thinking that might want to study physics or do experimentation or into science or tech or build robots, is there? You've got it. There's a couple of big strong messages here about feeling a bit of fear, but having the courage to follow the things you're interested in. Is there anything else that you think maybe practically or a starting point for women, or things that made a big difference to you that you think you could pass on?
Look, it's actually very simple in some ways, Mick. I want to share 2 words with you and with the girls that might hear this. Why not?
Why not?
It's something my mother used to say quite a bit, and still does. She's a fascinating woman. At the age of 70, my mother decided, I'm going to learn to ride a bicycle. I'm going to buy my first bicycle and ride a bike. At the age of 70, right? This is
Unreal.
some of the girls that listen to this. This will be like their grandmother's age or older. So
Yeah.
I was quite blown away when Mum said, "Oh, why not? Well, what's the worst that can happen?" Well, I was thinking you could fall off. However, but I guess that's the point. Why not? When we ask the question why, which we do in science, you really drill down to try and understand something deeply, right? So the why question is fantastic. But when you then ask yourself why not, that opens up possibility. So I'd like to invite the girls that listen to this, that might read what you have to write, when they're thinking about studying something or exploring a new idea for themselves, to get into building robots or science or anything at all, ask why not. If you can't think of a really good reason, that's not just an excuse, you've got to do it, especially if it makes you a little bit scared, because then you're going to have the most fun doing it. It's going to be so rewarding.
That's a really, really good message. I'd love to also know about your thoughts on teamwork with Mars, but we might have to leave that to another time, because I think that's obviously going to be critical, right? You can't just be individually brilliant. Nearly all good work requires that good teamwork. Really quickly, in terms of things that you can experiment with, potatoes or salt, or anything that might be water that you take into Mars, or your eyes, versus working with people. Do you have a preference of one or the other? Do you like a mix? How do you find them different?
Well, the people part is critical as well. And that's another science, isn't it? The social sciences and psychology. If we can't communicate well with each other and don't understand our own strengths and weaknesses as a human being, then how can we make sure that they're going to be made up for by our teammates, our colleagues? So putting together a team that culturally, from a psychological perspective, is a good fit is going to be more important than being the world's best physicist or the world's best robotics expert or anything like that. So I actually do some training in that area too. I work with a group called Group Relations Australia, which is a group of people who, mostly a lot of them are psychologists, counsellors, psychiatrists and the like. And so I do some training with them each year, a few times a year ideally, where I start to unpack what are some of my biases. Do I have a cultural bias? Do I have a bias against different sorts of people, or the way that some people might respond to things? And so I seek to understand myself a bit more so that I can be a better person and work better with lots of other different people. So that diverse community is really important. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, look, thank you so much. There's so much there to keep diving into and keep sharing, but the book is now slated to come out November 17, so there's plenty more for me to learn about Mars and all the work you're doing between now and then. But look, thanks for both being an inspiration, also for your work. I'm glad we got connected. Can't even remember. I think it might have been through someone tweeting about women in the space program in Australia. So really wonderfully to be connected, and thank you so much for sharing. The why not is I'm actually married because my wife said why not.
Fantastic.
At a wedding actually. So I'm a big, me and my 3 kids are big fans of bold women saying why not and going for it. So again, thank you so much for sharing. Really lovely to get to know you, meet you, and I hope we can stay in touch. Great background, and I hope you get to see the Earth from that view one day, and keep doing what you're doing. So thank you, Dianne.
Thanks.
Greatly appreciated.
You're welcome. Anytime.